So thanks for joining us. As I mentioned, I'm really excited to be moving forward here. I know that some of you have sat in on this presentation before when it's just me, and that is me, Greg Terry, Senior Account Executive with Computer Logic Group. So if you're sick of hearing my voice, I don't blame you, which is why I invited some other people to get on this call and tell you all about their experience, because you're probably sick of hearing from me already. So we won't waste a lot of time. We'll get right into chatting with them. So on the line right now is Trish Bailings from Fullerton School District out in California. She's their technical support specialist. They've got about 13,000 students. So they're a pretty good-sized district, and they're a K-8 district with about, if I had this right, about 20 schools. So they're a good-sized school system. Trish, you can go ahead and say hi.
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon.
Yes.
Excited to show you this product.
I'm sorry, Trish, I didn't mean to cut you off. So Trish is in California, so we get a lot of folks that are on the West Coast. So we do need to say good morning. And also on the line is Beth Ann Krupa. She's from Newtown School District in Connecticut. And so her story is a little different. She's a district database admin, a little smaller district, 4,200 students, with a high school, a middle school, 1 intermediate school, and 4 elementaries. And so I think one of the great things about having, oh, I'm sorry, Beth Ann, you can go ahead and say hi as well. Say good morning.
Hello, everyone.
Or after.
Thank you for having me.
And so part of the reason why I wanted to have both of them on is they both bring different perspectives. First of all, they're on different sides of the country. They have different rules and policies around attendance letters and when they should go and under what circumstances. Also, their size. There is a scale issue, of course. Fullerton, 13,000 kids. These issues are escalated exponentially by the number of schools that they have. But as you listen to Beth Ann, you realize it doesn't mean that in a small school system, we don't have a big issue managing this process. Also, where Trisha's district is a K-8 district, Beth Ann initially approached us because they had an issue at their high schools working with this. So I think one of the great things as we look at this is we can see that it's a true district solution, that there's use cases at the elementary school, high school, and of course in between at the middle school and intermediate schools. So what we're going to do here, our process forward. So I'm going to spend about 2 minutes making the case as to why this is important, something we're talking about. That's going to be all of 3 minutes. And then we're going to turn it over to Trish and Beth Ann for story time. They're going to talk about their experiences, both before and after implementing the logical attendance tracker. And so as they talk, I think it'll kind of resonate. Maybe you can hear some of what you're going through and what you're experiencing, where they started and where they're able to go with this. After that, I'll jump in. We'll do a live walkthrough of the logical attendance tracker. That won't take long. It's live right within the platform. That might take us 15 minutes or so. We'll talk about what's coming next, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. So that's where we will go. So really, the reason we're even talking about this, this big push, this big emphasis on attendance, and every state is a little different. And we even work with some school systems that span multiple states. And we'll talk about that in a minute. We have one of our clients who has schools all across the country. They're a network of schools, an affiliation. And so they all have different attendance rules depending upon where they're at. And so it's really important that we be able to manage this across multiple rule sets. And so we are able to do that. But if you're in that situation where you've got multiple schools across the country, this issue is even bigger and more robust for you. And so it's important that we take a look at this. Now, PowerSchool tracks attendance really well. A problem that we always hear about is when folks go to send their letters, their 5, 10, 15 day, 3, 6, 9, 12, whatever threshold you use, whether it's for daily attendance or class attendance, that it's just very difficult. That you're tracking the attendance in PowerSchool, you're pulling data out into Excel or Google Docs to try to track who got a letter, when they're getting their next one. And so the problem here, there's a lot of steps to doing that. You're pulling data into an outside tool where it's not always secure. And it just gets confusing. It takes too much time. That means most likely it's not getting done as frequently as it should. And sometimes we worked with a very large school district who said they actually sent their letters just before they sent report cards home. Because they had to. And so really what they were doing at that point is kind of a post-mortem to say, hey, here's what happened, parents. It's a little too late for you to influence and do anything about this. So instead of getting letter number 1, 2, and 3, they were just getting right to letter number 3 and getting to those more severe cases. And so that happens. That's out there. And so we want to try to stop that if we can. And perhaps even worse, if parents get improper letters, a letter when they weren't supposed to, or they get 3 letters, 4 letters all at once, they just get upset and irritated by that. And we want to avoid that. Also, if you are tracking loss of appeal, this is something that Newtown is doing and that Beth Ann is going to speak into directly when we get there. Tracking the loss of credit associated with this and the appeals process associated with the loss of credit really just exacerbates the issue. It just makes it so much more difficult to deal with. So that's where we're here. Obviously, you know a lot of this already, otherwise you wouldn't be hanging out and spending time with us for 35 minutes today. So with that being said, I'm going to take a page from LeVar Burton at Reading Rainbow and say, don't take my word for it. Trish, can you tell us a little bit about where you are at with your attendance letters or truancy letters before the logical attendance tracker, what the issue was that you're trying to solve, and then maybe your process to get where you are now?
Sure. Well, I've been doing this for 13 years and trying to come up with fast, productive ways for our 40-some office staff to try and be able to quickly track the attendance. I had created, like basically 3 fields to check box for letter 1, letter 2, letter 3. The schools would run the attendance count, find out who qualified for letter 1, letter 2. It became very difficult to manage, like you were saying earlier. And our district has a 95% hopeful attendance rate is what our goal is. And we're noticing in the last couple of years that our attendance was getting worse. And we do offer Saturday school, and a lot of Saturday school attendance was becoming low. So my goal was to try and find a way of getting parents and office staff to be able to notify them, right off the bat. And I came across the truancy tracker and instantly went, this is it. This is what we need. Presented it to our district, and they're like, get it going. And it saved, I think, our office staff about 8 hours a month. It was getting to the point where they were ignoring sending out the previous letters because it was just too difficult to handle. And talking with them the other day, it saved them about 8 hours a month. Our business department has noticed since we started using this in September that the last few months of our Saturday school attendance has increased quite a bit. So we're definitely recouping a lot of our ADA from getting the letters out, getting the parents to be notified, and our letters are a little strict, kind of harsh wording. We use a lot of the ed code in there, so it really, even the first letter really gets the parents to know, hey, this is serious. So it's definitely helped us. And the first day I presented it to them and I clicked the first button and showed them everybody how quickly the system found it, there was applause in the whole room. So it's definitely a huge help to our district, and we're definitely loving it.
Yeah,
they are using it every 2 weeks. They're running it every 2 weeks, and parents are calling in saying, "Why did I get this letter? I've never gotten one before." And they're like, "Yep, we're on a mission to get the attendance improvement." So
yeah, I love
it's been
that.
a huge help.
Thanks for that, Trish. You know, a couple things that you mentioned, I just want to point out. So they've got their 20 schools, but she mentioned she had 40 folks who were running this. So one of the things that Trish and I talked about when they were kind of going through the discovery process to find out what they were up against and how much of a benefit this would be, is that they have 2 part-time people at each school who manage this process. And so now it's really difficult to try to, manage this process with one person at each school, one person kind of minding that. But now, you've really doubled the pain, especially for Trish when she has people coming to her and saying, "Why can't we just do this in PowerSchool?" or "What's the problem?" And so first of all, the fact that everybody applauded when they saw it, I love to hear that. I wish I could put that on. I'm going to record her saying that. Actually, I just did. And I'm going to play it for people and I tell them about this because they literally applauded. So that's great. It's a win for them, but Trisha also gets some brownie points too for introducing such a great solution for them. So all of you tech support folks and IT folks out there, listen closely if you want some brownie points with your attendance clerks. Beth Ann, can you tell us, is there anything different that you're experiencing in Newtown?
Well, absolutely. I mean, we do have, our district-wide attendance policy where we do track our chronic absenteeism. So sending out those letters about ADA and everything if there's 6 or there's 10 absences, we do district-wide. However, our high school does run on meeting attendance. So they have a separate attendance policy that has to do with tracking course attendance and absenteeism for loss of credit due to loss of instructional time. So under this policy, we've always had it where when a student reaches a certain number of absences, either for like a semester-long class or a year-long class, they would either get a warning letter, or when they got to the next trigger point, they would get a loss of credit notification for the class with, steps on what they would have to do if they wanted to appeal for credit restoration. So our nightmare of a story kind of goes back to, well, when we have a meeting attendance conversion, calculating and getting all of this information out, is either exporting it with a, SQL-based system or what have you, is just kind of a nightmare. So my predecessor set it up that every night we would use the system reports engine to FTP all our meeting attendance records to an old FileMaker Pro program that would nightly generate letters and email them back to our attendance clerk at the high school. Now, this became so cumbersome because our clerk would print 3 copies of every letter, one to mail home to the parents, one to put in these big attendance file binders in her office, and then another to stick in the mailbox of either the assistant principal or the counselor or the student dean that was kind of assigned to these students as a case manager. Now, this got the job done, and it got the information in the letters where it needed to go. The problem was in the process and in some of the end results. So after letter copies were mailed, the clerk would then need to sort all these letters by hand into these big binders. She would have to update these shared spreadsheets for when this student lost credit, but this student's only on a warning, just to try and keep track of everything. Now, think of this 1,600 students, 8 scheduled classes each on an 8-day rotation, and triggers for a semester-long class versus a year-long class. It was just incredibly time-consuming and cumbersome. We're talking hours. So part of the problem was doing all this by hand. It left a lot of room for human error. One of the biggest issues she had was, say, she would send a letter and put stuff in the binder and put stuff in the spreadsheet, but then find out maybe a month later that, oh, wait, the nurse went in and changed the attendance for that day to an excused attendance because of a doctor's note. So then she'd have to go back through all these binders and update all of this information, change attendance codes here and there. And it just was overwhelming. But on top of all of that day-to-day management of it, the other end of it was the security side of things. And this is something that we're very sensitive to in Newtown post Sandy Hook. We're very mindful about sensitive student data and privacy. And with all these binders and papers being kind of all filed together and shared spreadsheets between who knows how many people within these offices, letters printed and stuffed into mailboxes, we really felt that it was a security issue on top of it all. So last spring, when we were kind of going through our budget and looking and saying, hey, you know, this server that we're running this old FileMaker Pro system on, you know, it's end of life. Let's start to look for another alternative. And that's when I came across Computer Logic's product. We really wanted something that was more accurate and more efficient and definitely more secure. And I can say we've only been using the logical attendance tracking at the high school since September. And well, our attendance clerk, she does happy dances for us because it only takes her 10 minutes a day, whereas it used to take a couple hours a week to get all of this done. And when Greg gets to my favorite part in the demo, when we talk about the loss of credit and appeals tracking, this is what's really made a difference in our town. So I will turn it back over to Greg, but when we get there, I would really like to toot the horn on that one.
Yeah, I'm happy to let you do that, Beth Ann. I welcome that. Thank you. So first of all, a couple takeaways from me. We had a FileMaker Pro sighting. Love that. And you know, pushing data out, putting data on in different spreadsheets and different applications and in binders. You know, one of the beautiful things about PowerSchool is that it's really open and you can pull data out in different formats. That's really good. But you know, at the same time, if we don't have to do that, then maybe we shouldn't. And I think that's one of the things that we can do here is we say, well, you really don't have to do it for this purpose. So let's just take one more avenue for data to possibly go astray out of the picture. So I appreciate that. And you know, the other thing, Beth Ann, as you were talking, that really dawned on me is, you know, as we talk about the logical attendance tracker, we being Computer Logic Group, we can tell folks what it does when we hear really the story behind the story. That is, you know, how difficult it is to do this and the multiple copies. And oh, by the way, later we found out that the nurse changed the attendance code. So now all these letters that we circulated in different areas, we got to try to track them down, and we don't find out for a month later. And it can just lead to havoc. You know, it just really helps us understand how deep this problem really gets, and that it really affects more than just the attendance clerk or whomever it is trying to take attendance. You know, it really runs very deep in the school or in the district. So I appreciate that background info. So let's see, all that being said, why don't we jump out of here, if I can figure out how to do this, and launch the logical attendance tracker, and we'll do our walkthrough. Now, I'm not going to show you everything there is to do in the logical attendance tracker for sake of time, but also for the sake of putting you to sleep. We'll go through and I'll show you the process. We won't hit all the nitty-gritty details, but if you have a question about the nitty-gritty details, let me know. I want to make sure that we do answer your questions and we're showing you what you need to see. But I'm going to log in. So I'm just logging into our version of PowerSchool. You can see here that I'm at the district office. I'm going to go ahead and change this to the high school. Most of my my demo set here is at the high school. But keep in mind, this works equally well at a junior high, middle school, intermediate, elementary. And it's kind of important here that I'm showing you that we're switching schools, because as I go in to do the setup work for the logical attendance tracker, I'm just going to go under setup and then school. And I'm going to go into the logical attendance tracker here. Now, I'm not going to go into the code categories, but we do pull, well, I guess I am going to go into the code categories. We're going to pull these, so you'll see these come up in just a minute. Sorry, my mouse is a little more sensitive than I thought. So we pull the relevant data from PowerSchool. So you do your attendance just as you always do, nothing changes there. But it's when we come into these rule sets that we start saying, okay, go look at that attendance that we already took, and we're going to start working on letters. Now, I'm going to do things a little out of order. Instead of showing you all the setup work and how we got there first, I'm going to show you what the end users will do. That is your attendance clerks, admin assistants, whoever it is that's going to be running these letters. Essentially what they would do on a weekly basis or bi-weekly, depending upon how often, how frequently you run your letters, is that if I'm the attendance clerk for Apple Grove High School, I come into letters not sent, okay? And one of the beautiful things I want to point out here is that this plugin, almost everything that we do is going to be right here contained in this area. So we're not skipping around to a bunch of different locations. We're really trying to be self-contained. And so as I show you this, it might not make a ton of sense initially. I just want you to get a feel for how easy this is. And then we'll go back and we'll explain what all this stuff means. So as the attendance clerk, I'll come in, I'll choose my rule set. I'm going to go with meeting attendance example. This is period class attendance. So what Beth Ann was talking about at their high school, doing this for meeting attendance, that's what this rule set is for. I'm going to say, for me, I've got 3 triggers in my school, 4 triggers. We send them at 3, 6, 9, and 12 absences. And so right here, I only have kids who meet trigger number 1 and 2. I don't have anybody who meets trigger 3 and 4 yet. But I'll say, okay, let's shoot for trigger number 2. Here we have 1 student who meets that trigger. I'm going to choose my second letter here, which goes as 6 absences. I'm going to print the letter, and then I'm going to mark it sent. And then I can go back, and I can change my trigger for my threshold to trigger 1, which is at 3 absences. And you can see I've got more kids here who meet this trigger. And I'll change my letter to letter number 1. And I can print letters and mark them sent. Now, if you have questions about what on earth all this means, we'll come back and we'll hit that in a second. I'll show you the setup, and that'll answer a few questions, and then we'll come back in here and talk about these things in a little more detail. So we talked about our data sets. Let's go to our rule sets and see what that means. So under meeting attendance, I'm going to view my rules. And now I mentioned that we're going to see those code categories pop up that we were just looking at a minute ago. And so I can say, okay, for us, what I'm looking for is any kid who's marked excused or unexcused absent. That's who we're looking at. And here over here, we have our thresholds. So for year-long courses, that's what we have here. This is semester 1 courses, semester 2. You can do trimesters, whatever it is. This would pop up for you automatically. But for my year-long courses, threshold 1 or trigger 1 is to send a letter at 3 absences. Trigger 2 is at 6, trigger 3 is at 9, trigger 4 is at 12. So if I click on this, this is really, really easy to set up. So threshold number 1, we're going to send it at 3. If at your school you do, 4, 8, 12, you do that. And it's super simple. And now, if this is going to apply to your semester-based courses, you can check this box off, and this information will transfer down to our semester-based courses. If you have different thresholds for your semester-based courses, you can set them up independently here by just clicking on them, okay? I'm going to go back and leave this at 3 just so I've got good data to work with. But we just go through, we set up trigger 2, trigger 3, trigger 4. Now, trigger 4, I have this little button, the box here, LOC checked off. That stands for loss of credit. And we're not going to dive into loss of credit yet. That'll come in a couple minutes. But if your school or your district offers or requires a loss of credit at a certain threshold, so for me, it's trigger 4. So at 12 absences, that's where you lose credit. We just check that off, and the system will manage that for you. So hopefully right now you're doing a happy dance or applauding if you manage a loss of credit process and you find it difficult. Now, one other thing, let's talk about these weights that we have here. If you're a school and you say, well, we're not tracking excused absences, we just care about unexcused. This is so simple. All you have to do is change this here and there. Now we're saying an unexcused absence counts as 1. Once you have 3 of those, 6 of those, 9 of those, 12 of those, you're going to get a letter. Now, I don't want to muddy the water, but we have some flexibility here that if you include tardies, we can do that as well. So let's say in theory, you do something like this, where you say, okay, for us, we're going to send a letter at 3, 6, 9, and 12. This is going to be a compilation of any of these. So if I have an unexcused absence, 2 tardies, because they're worth 0.5, and 1 unexcused absence, that gets me to 3. Okay, so all these added together are what's going to define our thresholds. Now, if we go back and we look at our rule sets, you'll also see that I have a rule set set up specifically for tardies. So one thing that you can do is you can have multiple rule sets at each school. Okay, now I'm going to go back and show you this. I'm sorry, I'm already here. So here's our rule sets. And so we can do this for meeting attendance and daily attendance, and also for tardies in semester 1, tardies in semester 2. The thresholds, the rule sets are going to be different for each and every one of these. And that just gives us a lot of flexibility. Let's say, you send letters based on 3, 6, 9, and 12 excused or unexcused absences. But maybe you have a rule that's for athletic eligibility that kids are ineligible for, there we go, that's what I'm looking for, ineligible for athletics once they reach 7 absences on the year. You can set up a different rule set just for that and say, we're going to send letters at 3, 6, 9, and 12 as per our state or district attendance policy, but we're also going to send one at 6 absences to say, hey, your student is in danger of losing their athletic eligibility. We just want to let you know 1 more absence and they will be ineligible. Okay, so that's just an example of some of the things that you can do. So now that we know what these rule sets are, let's come back over here. And you can see here, here's all the rule sets that we were just working with. We'll go back to our meeting attendance example. And right now you can see it says your data is being processed. Please stand by. It's querying the data real time every time we come in here. So it's looking, as of right now, who meets these criteria. Now, one of the things I said is we're not going to look in detail at each and every little nuance of this, but we can, when we're setting up rules, tell it to ignore certain classes if you're doing this for meeting attendance. If you're doing daily attendance, it doesn't matter. So if you don't want it to look at study halls or something like that, it won't. You tell it a certain time frame that each of these apply for, okay? So there's a few different rules that we can set up in there. And now we can see our triggers. Hopefully this makes a little more sense to you, okay? So we're gonna run this for all the kids who met trigger 2, choose their letter, and we'll look at the letters in just a moment. Print and mark letter sent. Then we'll go to trigger 1. Now, if I'm going to choose a letter and let you see what it looks like here. I'm going to print this letter. Now, this is just a sample, okay? This is a basic letter that we just slapped together just for sample purposes. Yours would be probably different than this, and you can change them. You can make them more severe with the higher the threshold gets. So Trish said that theirs start off pretty severe right away. Maybe you want to wait till letter number 2 before you start quoting, state RSA codes or something like that. You can have a different letter, and most likely will have a different letter for each threshold that kids can meet. Okay, we'll come back to letters in a minute when we look at the letter template. Now, we looked at printing these and then marking them sent one at a time. But most likely we'd be doing this en masse, right? Maybe we want to spot check one, we look at one, print a screen, make sure it looks right. But really what we would do is we would just print all letters, and then we would mark them all sent. Now, mark them sent, what does that mean? That's the magic that happens in the background where we say, okay, this kid had 3 absences. They're getting their first letter for 3 absences. Remember that they met that threshold, and do not send another letter at 4 and 5 absences, but do pull them up when they reach their 6th absence. So marking them all sent is really what kind of ticks the system's internal memory to say, hey, this kid got this letter. They shouldn't get a letter again on absence 4 or 5, but they will get one on 6. Okay, so that's what the print all and mark them sent. One other thing that we can do here is we can make the kids that we're working with our current student selection. Now, let's see here. We've got a small group of kids. I'm going to make them my current student selection. We'll go back to the homepage of PowerSchool in a few minutes, and you'll see that I'm working with these kids. Why is this useful? Well, what we really designed it for is that if you have letters that you've already written in PowerSchool and you like them, they're more sophisticated or complex than ours, you can just find this list of kids. You can mark them all sent, so you can do all the tracking in here, make them your current student selection, and then just go back to the main body of PowerSchool and say, okay, we're going to print letters off from here. Okay, that's easy enough. Now, a question came up from Kim. Will this need to be set up for each period individually, or is it just unique days across the periods? We can get more into the setup, Kim, and kind of talk specifically about your setup offline if you'd like, but you shouldn't need to set this up for each period individually. The way it's set up today is to say, look for kids from this particular class, and when they get 3 absences in this class, 6 absences from this class, 9, 12, create the letter. The next version of the logical attendance tracker is going to enable us to look across multiple periods and do that. So you can say, look, we don't want just 3 absences from this class, but 3 class absences regardless of which class it's from. That version is coming out in a couple weeks. So if that's what you're getting at, the development work is almost done. We're working on the front end interface right now. Let's see, can the letters be sent as email without any intervention by a clerk? No, Kim, not exactly. So they can be emailed. What will happen is we'll get a PDF of all the letters. You actually just saw one there, but we'll have a run of a PDF. And so most schools have an emergency notification system, and most of them, those emergency notification systems will allow you, or will break up a PDF file and will email them out. So if you want to do that, you can. Now, without getting too sidetracked, we haven't done that yet, and we could do that internally, but we haven't done that yet just for privacy considerations. And we think the better approach to this is to embed those letters within the parent portal. So maybe send a letter to parents that says, an email that says, hey, log into the parent portal, you've gotten an important notification or something like that. And then they log into the parent portal and they can see their letters in there. And so that's one thing that we're discussing for a future release of this. It should be pretty easy to add. I'm not sure that's making it into the next release that's coming out in a couple weeks. Okay, we'll keep trucking, and I'll get back to these other questions here also as we go. So now we mark them sent, we print the letters, we mark them sent, and away we go. The system will start tracking those, and remember that. Now, the question was asked by Angie, and hopefully, Angie, this will answer your question. You want to know, well, what kind of logging do we do for the fact that these kids got these letters? Well, let's look at that. So I'm going to go to student history. And so here again, it's going to take a second because it's querying in real time and looking to see, hey, who have we most recently sent letters for? And again, you have different filters up here, so you can look for kids based on term, look for certain students, look for kids coming from certain grade levels, look for students based on courses, the rule sets that we are using, okay, and based on certain triggers. But this is just kind of a running log of all the letters that students have gotten. So for Alfred, we can see a 10th grade world history using this rule set. He met this trigger. Here's the points. Here's the date that he qualified for the letter. And here's the date that we actually marked it as being sent. Now, you can see a bit of a disparity there. So when you see some wonky data in here, just know that's not the system. That's us just messing around with the data as we go through and test and do presentations. So normally you'd see that they qualified for a letter and then the date that it was sent right within a tight time frame. One thing that we'll look at in a minute is we also have an individual student log, which I absolutely love, that shows for Alfred all the letters he has ever received, and then we'll see that for each and every student. We also have a My History tab, and so I've only actually run this and actually sent letters out of this twice. So I'm constantly viewing this and doing what we've already done, but I've only actually sent letters a couple times. But this is a cool tool, especially for somebody like Trish, who has 2 people at each school who run this. Each person can see a history of all the times that they've run this and who they actually came up with in their run. So on July 11th, for this full attendance rule set, this is our daily attendance rule set, we found 2 kids, I found 2 kids and sent them letters, or 2 instances. And here, again, on July 18th, poor Alfred, he gets picked on a lot. So he missed calculus, and so he had 2 absences in calculus, so he got a letter. Now the templates. Our templates are designed to be very, very simple. So this letter that we see here is being triggered from this template. And so we just give them a name, and we have 3 sections of body, a logo, and we can merge in some PowerSchool data fields in here as well. Now, with the next release of this, the Attendance Tracker 3, I'm very happy to say that we're adding more functionality here. We don't want to make it too complex, but we know that there's more that you want to do with the letters. And so we are adding functionality here, such as being able to merge in multiple courses on one letter and so forth. And so you'll see more functionality within the letter templates with the next version, again, which is due out in a couple weeks. So not vaporware, the back end is done. We're doing the front end development now. Glancing over this, letter errors. So Beth Ann mentioned the idea that sometimes they go through and they find that over a period of time that the attendance has changed. And so if a kid had, let's say they met the second trigger and they got their 6 absences, they get their 6 absence letter, that maybe their parents send home a note. They, oh, we forgot, he was at the hospital. Here's a note from the doctor or whatever. And so you go and you change the attendance. Well, now this student is at 5 absences, but the system is remembering that they got that 6 absence letter. And so when they get to 6 absences again, it won't want to send that letter. This will find all the kids who have kind of an incongruity there where you're saying, hey, the actual absences don't align with what we're remembering the letters as. And so you can go back and fix that. So now that student who came with the note, they got dropped down to 5, the system will remove that letter. And now when they get their next absence, should they get another absence, then they'll get that 6 absence letter again. And the system will track that. Okay, so we're almost ready for Beth Ann to chime in with the loss of credit, which she loves. So we talked about this a few minutes ago, that with the loss of credit, when we set up a rule set, and for me it was the 4th threshold, we said, okay, at that 12 absences, this student is gonna lose credit. And maybe the letter before that explains that, hey, the next step is they're gonna lose credit. So parents are well aware. The system, as soon as they get that 4th letter for 12 absences, the system will also drop them in here and flag them as losing credit. So here's all my kids who have lost credit. They're flagged as losing credit. So now at the end of the marking term, when you go to store grades, you've got a list of kids who you are pulling credit from, and you pull credit from them. The system also creates a separate data field that you can use to drop on your transcript to indicate why this student is losing credit or why they lost credit. And if you track appeals to that, which you probably do, if you pull credit away, you might need to restore credit in certain circumstances, and so there's a process for that. All those kids who are flagged here as losing credit also show up here under the appeals. Okay, and so right here I can see for Alfred, well, we'll just kind of look at these a little bit closer. Everybody who shows up here is flagged as LOC or flagged as loss of credit. Now, if they've changed, if they've entered an appeal, you can change their status to appealed. You can go to appeal denied or appeal successful. Flagged, appealed, an appeal denied, they're all being flagged as losing credit. They're still going to lose credit. Appeal successful, that credit is restored to them, but we maintain a record that yes, that at some point they lost credit, so that now if they end up here again, you can say, look, we restored credit to them. Their appeal is successful, restored credit. We're here again. This is a big, big problem. You know, we really need to have a conference and talk about how we rectify this. Beth Ann, what do you want to add to that?
Well, I just want to add how easy of a process this used to be based on what we were facing in the past. So in the past, with all our binders, like I said, we would be going through binders, finding the loss of credit notification to a student, and if they had submitted an appeals, they would have to attach that appeal letter, and then the appeals team, so the administration, the guidance counselors, would have to sit in these rooms for days at a time, going between a binder to a PowerSchool record, to grades, to attendance, and it was extremely cumbersome. So now they just went through the entire process. It took an afternoon to get through all their students. They would go into the LOC screen, make that their current selection of students, send out one last notification to all the students on, if you're going to appeal, this is how you're going to do it. As the appeal letters came in, they would flag students, and on the appeal screen here, they could search for students at different levels. So those that had submitted something, or those that had either just been flagged or had submitted and hadn't gone through the process yet. It was so easy for the team to just make them the current selection and review the history of the students and either approve or deny, pass it along to the guidance office, who clicked one button and was able to get the list of the students they had to restore credit to, instead of binders and spreadsheets.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And so, this is actually something that the Stamford, Connecticut school system had asked us for. They used the logical attendance tracker. They were one of the first districts in the country to use the new version of it that we're looking at now. And so they said, hey, can you do something with our loss of credit? And so we just put this together, and we didn't realize what a valuable time saver this would be for those districts who do offer loss of credit. And if you don't offer loss of credit, hopefully you didn't fall asleep through all that, because it might come about, as we focus more and more on increasing attendance measures and attendance outputs, that often comes up. And so there's perfectly valid discussions around whether it's a good idea or not. But should you be asked, can we handle this? You know that yes, it can be managed inside of PowerSchool quite easily. Now, the last thing that I want to show you here inside the logical attendance tracker is I'm going to go back to the PowerSchool start page. And remember that when we pulled up our list of kids who needed a letter, we said, hey, make these students our current student selection. So here's our list of kids. And so one thing that we can do is we can pull up under academics, we've got the logical attendance tracker here. This is going to be an individual student log that shows all of the times a student has received a letter. Okay, and this is something that it takes a minute to pull up and query out, because it's going through and sorting through all the student letters, and it pulls it all real time. So it's querying it all the time. So instead of waiting for it, I just pulled up a screenshot. But this is that area that Beth Ann and I had kind of talked about at one of the PowerSchool user group meetings back in the fall, where she said this has been a huge asset for us, especially as we have our guidance counselors or other people who want access to these, and where she said, we used to store these letters in the binders, and we don't need to do that now. Nobody needs to go sorting through binders, especially if we need to change a letter. We kind of restored an absence to a student. So right from here, normally you wouldn't see this information at the top. These are all the times a student is qualified for a letter and I never actually sent it. What you would see is here, the fact that for these courses, given this rule set, and you see we've been using multiple rule sets, the date that they qualified for the letter, the date we marked it sent, how many absences or points they had at letter time, and then we can just click here to actually print a copy of that letter. So now if the parents come in, there's a meeting, and they say, oh, I never got that letter, I don't know what you're talking about, you can print it from here. It's stored right inside of here electronically, digitally. Or if your guidance counselor or a dean want to have a conference with the parents, they can see all this and have access to all this information here, okay? Now, that big picture is what we have for the logical attendance tracker. Now we can go back and I think we're at the point where we can do Q&A. So let me pull this up here. All right, preguntas. What questions do we have? We have some that were sent out to me directly. I will answer those. But in the meantime, if there's a question that you want to ask of either Trish or Beth Ann, go ahead and raise your hand. Or myself, I'm sorry. You can have a question of me as well, and I will answer that question. All right, so Kathy Nelson, I see that your hand is up. It's been raised for 52 minutes. So I don't know if this is a new question or not. If this is not a new question, you can go ahead and put your hand down. Just click the button for raising or lowering hand. Keep it up if you do have another question. In the meantime, I'll take Lori. Lori Zarelli, you had a question. I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question. All right, Lori, go ahead.
Yes, we have classes at school here that are multiple period, like our science labs. Mm-hmm. And how would your triggers handle a multiple period class that we count as only one absence?
The answer here, and Paul Nori had asked the same thing. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name right, Paul. Asked a similar question regarding science labs. The fast answer is, I don't know. What that means is that I need to go back and talk to our development team to see how that works. I've not come across that yet, and Trish and Beth Ann, I'm not sure if you have that experience if your schools do that. Probably not with Fullerton, but maybe Newtown High School does. So if you have something to chime in there, feel free to do that. But short of one answer, I can.
We do have some science classes that do have a lab, and I would have to check with our attendance clerk, but I do believe we do count the attendance once for that day when we have the science class bridge 2 periods for the day, but it does count it once in the attendance tracker. But I would want to, triple check with the clerk just to make sure, but I believe so, yes.
Thank you for that, Beth Ann.
Yes.
So Paul and Lori, I will get some clarity on that matter for you and let you know for sure.
Okay, great.
Thank you so much. I'm going to remute you here. And let me go through, where else did we have questions? So Kathy, your hand's still up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. Sorry to make you wait for so long. You are unmuted. Go ahead, Kathy. All right, Kathy, we are not hearing you, so I apologize. If you do have a question, you can follow up with me directly. I'll post my email address up on the screen as well as my phone number. I'm going to remute your line here. Let's see, Kimberly Somerville, you have a question. I'm going to unmute you. You're self-muted, so I can't unmute you. Ah, there we go.
Okay. Will we be able to get the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah, so what I can do is I can send you the PowerPoint. There's probably not a lot of detail in the PowerPoint, but I can also make sure that folks get a copy of this webinar. The only caveat here is it's going to be a really big file, really big. So I might have to find a unique way to get that out to folks. But if anybody wants a copy of this, let me know. Again, I'll go ahead and put my information up here now, and we can come back to that. But if you do want to copy the webinar, let me know. It's gterry@goclg.com. Also, if you'd like pricing, I obviously would be more than happy to provide some pricing for you. The pricing's pretty straightforward. It's a sliding scale based on the size of your district. So send me your district enrollment. If it's just going to be for one school, let's say and Newtown originally went down this path where they said, we just want this for our high school, let me know. We can price it out just for that one school if that's the only need. But this really is a true district solution. So generally speaking, we price it for the district. Tell me how many students you have. We can price that out for you and get that right back out to you pretty quickly. All right, let's see. Let me go through our list here of folks. See what other questions we have. All right, Lori, do you have another question? And not that it's bad, I make that sound terrible. I'm going to unmute you and let me know if you have another question. Hi, Lori, do you have another question?
I don't think I can think of something right now. No, sorry.
I'm sorry, your hand was still up. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put up there. Sorry about that. Paul, same thing. If you have a question, I'll unmute you. If you don't have another question, I know that you asked one in the chat pane there. You can click the little button to put your hand down. Hey, Paul, do you have another question? All right, I'm not hearing you, Paul. So if you do have a question, we can tackle that offline. All right, and on the chat pane here, okay, so just for clarification, so Anne asked, just for clarification, the tracker only tracks period attendance, not multiple periods across the day for daily attendance. So Anne, I'm not positive that I'm going to answer this properly, but there's a couple choices right now, and actually this leads into what's yet to come for the logical attendance tracker. So right now, there's two main ways to track attendance. There's daily attendance, which is to say for the day, this kid is either absent or tardy or whatnot. And so we can handle that. Often we see at the elementary level that that's the way that they're tracking attendance. So it'll say, find the print letters for kids who are absent 3, 6, 9, 12, or 5, 10, 15, whatever your thresholds are, days absent. For class attendance today, okay, this is today, it's looking to say, show me all the kids who are absent 3, 6, 9, 12 times for science, for social studies. The next version is going to also add the ability to say, find all the kids who are absent 3 times, regardless what class it was. So maybe they missed science, social studies, and math. That's your 3, you're getting a letter, okay? That will be in the next release, which again is pending within a couple weeks here. We should wrap this up the first week in March. There might be QA testing beyond that, but it should all be buttoned up the first week of March. Also what we're adding, is consecutive absences. So if you have a rule set that says after X number of consecutive absences in a row that you send a letter, we will be able to accommodate that. Also time-based attendance. For states like Ohio, South Carolina, where you do have time-based attendance, we will be able to track the time-based attendance, and that might be based on a number of minutes or hours absent, or based on percent will be included within that. And so that'll be wrapped up in that. And for those states that do that, like Ohio, South Carolina and other states where they have these statewide policies around that, around timed attendance, sometimes you're provided with a tool to find the kids who qualify as being truant, but no easy way to send and track the letters. Well, we can get that list of kids from that tool that you're given, drop them into the attendance tracker, and still use that list as a way to track those kids. So fear not, if you're in Ohio, South Carolina, or another state along those lines, we can certainly help out with that. Paul, you had a question for Trish and Beth Ann. Did you start using the software at the beginning of a new school year? Can a mid-year start work? I will let each of you respond to that.
In Newtown, we started at the beginning of the school year for the high school for this year, and we do plan on fully rolling out district-wide for the next school year.
And in Fullerton, we actually started after our school year started. So what we ended up doing is each of the schools would go through, if they had already sent the letters in our old process way, they kept a list of those kids, and then they went into the truancy tracker, and instead of printing the letters for those kids again, all they had to do was go in and mark that those letters had already been sent. And that way it got the system caught up. And now they're all caught up and completely using the logical truancy tracker.
Thank you for that. And, you know, Paul, just as a word of notice, we have a lot of schools who went through that process and did a mid-year start. We rolled out the logical attendance tracker just before summer break, so it took a little time to get traction with it. So most of our clients that are using it did start with a mid-year start. And that first time you run it, it takes a little time to kind of process all that and get all the information kind of logged in. But after that initial run through, it's going to save you a ton of time, especially, you know, as the year progresses, you're going to have more and more and more kids who reach these upper thresholds. So it's probably more important now than ever. Kathy Nelson, you'd asked a question. We use the truancy and attendance letters, both view only and extract feature in PowerSchool under system reports, attendance tracking, and notification for truancy purposes. So my question would be, what is the difference between the logical attendance tracker versus truancy and attendance letters view only extract? So that's a great question, Kathy. So some folks have been able to get the PowerSchool truancy attendance tracking to work. And that's good. What that does is it goes through and it's going to query those kids and find them, the kids who meet the criteria and need a letter. What our module does, first of all, there's a ton of schools who just aren't able to get the PowerSchool version to work based on their rule sets. So that you're able to do that is a testament to you, your district, whoever set that up. That's really good. And so I wouldn't say that we need to replace that. But the problem still comes in creating those letters and then tracking the fact that those kids got the letters. For me, I think the biggest value in this, if we're to strip everything else away and we could still say, okay, this kid is going to get this letter and they don't need another letter again and don't send another letter until they meet this other criteria, and then automatically pull them up and drop them in this letter. That to me is worth the price of admission. And that's often what we see missing when folks are just using the PowerSchool version, is that ability to track the letters. And that screen that I had shown a few moments ago, let me see here, the log, this screen here, this log of all the letters that somebody got, that is missing, along with the whole loss of credit process. Kathleen Botticello, I hope I'm not mispronouncing your last name, Kathleen. So she'd asked, what is the implementation time for this? Great question. So the beautiful thing is that this is just a plugin, which means we can send this to you. Sometimes it doesn't go via email, it gets stripped out. So we can either go onto your server and drop it on for you. Thank you. I'm glad I pronounced that perfectly, Kathleen. We can drop it on for you, or we can just deliver it to you. It's a simple plugin. You just drop it in, and it extends the capabilities of your PowerSchool. As far as setting up, usually what we recommend, it's not mandatory, but we offer a half a day of implementation, setup, and training. And really the training, I mean, what you saw is pretty much it. The most difficult part is to kind of conceptualize your rule sets and say, well, how do I need to set those up in here? And that's usually where we end up giving the help, is we say, okay, let's sit down and talk about what you want to see out of this in the end, and we'll show you how to set up those rules. It does come with documentation, so you can take a stab at it, but generally speaking, take a stab, and then we'll go and we'll help you set that up, no more than a half day. So really, if you ordered this today, you could be up and running with it on Friday, no problem. Let's see. Oh, one other thing that I just want to point out is maintenance and support. So when you buy this module, you do buy it once. It's a one-time license fee, and then there's an ongoing maintenance and support. The maintenance and support is just a fraction of the purchase price. It's 20% of the purchase price. That's a pretty typical number for maintenance and support contracts, maybe a little on the low side. And so what that means is that should PowerSchool change something on their end that renders the plugin not usable, we go in and we fix it. Now, I know PowerSchool never ever does that, despite the fact that very recently they offered an update that broke all kinds of things in reports and stuff, and people's report cards and transcripts. It didn't affect the attendance tracker, thankfully, but obviously PowerSchool updates their system. So if we need to update ours for that reason, we will. Also, we're always adding to this. So what we're seeing here is really our first big push with this. So as we saw this, we knew there was more things we wanted to add. We wanted to make the letters more robust. Eventually, we're going to be dropping those letters into the parent portal. We wanted the ability to track time-based attendance, consecutive attendance, and track multiple absences across multiple courses if your school does that. And so as we develop those new capabilities, you get them at no charge. There's not an upcharge for that. And we just give you the new plugin, and you can drop it in, or we can drop it in for you. All right, so I'm going to pull up my contact information again. Now, if you're anything like me, you've got a bazillion things going on. I think most of you have hung on much longer than I intended you to, and I thank you for that very, very much. But if you want some pricing on this, I'd love to provide that for you. It's a very reasonable cost for this plugin. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. We do have minimums, but generally speaking, it's $1 per student or less in year one, and then the maintenance and support, about 20% ongoing. So it does scale. The cost goes down as your enrollments go up. So email me, gterry@goclg. We also know that budgeting season is upon us, so if you need a proposal for budget purposes, let me know and we can provide that for you. We'll include the module itself, we'll include maintenance and support costs, and also the recommended half-day implementation cost.